Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Mark Sleboda, straight out of Moscow. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda. And Mark, tell everybody where they can find all your fine works online.
You can find my maleficent screeds at Elon Musk's at Twitter X at Mark Sleboda1, or Telegram or Substack at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
Mark Sleboda, as I look on Sputnik International, I see Putin and Witkoff hold 3-hour-long meeting. Oh man, it's gotten to the point where it's like I'm sitting there and they're like, "Hey, have you heard Putin and Witkoff are holding a meeting? What do you think?" And I'm like, let me look in the refrigerator. We got any burgers left? I'm hungry.
There we go.
Get out of here. I mean, are people in Moscow still looking at this with interest, or are they just kind of moseying about, going their normal day to life? Oh, there's Witkoff again. All right, it must be Thursday. I guess he'll be back next Thursday for another 6-hour meeting to talk about nothing.
Yeah,
are they doing anything? Are they playing cards in that room?
Say that anyone in I can't say that anyone in Russia even notices that he's here or cares. Right? I mean, maybe in the Kremlin they care a little bit more, but I imagine then it's even not much. I mean, when I hear that that there's more talks with in Europe, and Witkoff is coming over here again, and the Europeans in Kiev are throwing a spanner in the works again, and I'm just like, I feel like I'm in Groundhog's Day, right? I mean, like we're recycling through it. Can I just hit the fast forward button to get back to the war? I mean, please, come on. That's what I feel. Yeah, because none of this is going to result in anything. I think the Kremlin has firmly reached that position, right? I sense that there is a lack of sincerity. There is this tinny note of insincerity on all sides in these negotiations. Whether we're talking the obviously fractious Trump admin, if we can even speak of it as such, right? Whether we're talking, the West, meaning the US, the Europeans, right? And the Kiev regime on one side, and Russia. Russia doesn't believe that these will result in anything. They still lay out, hey, 1% chance is better than nothing, right? They're going through the motions. That's what it feels like, is everyone is going through the motions. And the only thing that seems to really matter is it's like you're playing some game at a casino, and you're trying to decide whether the ball is going to end up bouncing on black or red. Whether at the end of this, when it is declared a failure and impossible to proceed towards any diplomatic settlement, does Trump blame the Kiev regime more or Russia more? Right? That seems to be what everyone is playing towards, is just when it fails, we want the other side to be blamed more for that failure. I think this is much less urgent on the Russian side, because they have already been defeating the United States and Europe with the full backing of the Kiev regime right now, going on 3 years. And that is why Trump comes in seeking some type of end to the settlement that will save the U.S. proxy regime in Kiev. If they were winning, Trump would not be calling for a ceasefire or an end to the settlement. He would just be, barreling through and finishing Russia off Although amazingly, whether they're winning or losing, the U.S. is still trying to dictate the terms of how everything goes. But Russia is just keep on going. All right. Russia is speaking to Russian, the military industrial complex chiefs in the last week, right? Solidifying long-term, medium-term, short-term, medium-term, long-term plans for continuing the conflict for the foreseeable future, for making sure that if the war continues next year and the year after that and 3 years from now, that Russia is positioned to carry on that long or however long it takes for whatever is required. They're very serious about this. Yes, they're doing the jaw, right? They're meeting Witkoff, right? They'll go wherever there's a meeting, that they are invited to. But at the same time, they are not taking their eye off the battlefield for a second. They are progressing. In fact, this week, while Trump, in his increasingly incoherent, were they ever coherent? Maybe that's maybe that's not correct.
Just to say,
consistently incoherent social media rants. Right. At one time, he's castigating Zelensky for boasting that Crimea, which has not been under the control of Kiev since 2014, is Ukrainian and will never be anything else, right? My Crimean wife and my family there may beg to differ. And certainly reality has begged to differ for the last, 11 years now? But on the other hand, Trump was also deeply upset at Russian missile and drone strikes that hit Kiev and across Kiev regime controlled parts of Ukraine, specifically targeting military industrial complex, drone production facilities, and other sites. And he said this was not the appropriate time while he's trying to get a ceasefire. I'm not even sure that was that what was up for discussion. I don't think a ceasefire was up for discussion myself. No. I didn't think. I thought they had given up on the ceasefire and had a loose Kellogg plan framework for ending the conflict. But regardless, right? He says it was inappropriate and stop, Putin, stop, right? In his ridiculous all capital letters, shouting like, he's some 11-year-old on social media. I can't say, I imagine there's a team of FSB trained psychologists, right, that are trying to parse where Trump's mentality is, and providing some psychological analysis and so forth. How to manage this orange buffoon.
They all resigned. I understand. They all resigned last week. They threw in I quit. I had enough of this.
In the last week, they revealed what had previously been a president from the Kremlin to Donald Trump, which was a painting of Trump in a moment of defiance, flanked by American flags after surviving the assassination attempt. And I think this was probably, shall we say, a more flattering painting than the one that Trump was complaining about in the United States a couple of weeks ago. But, I see this and I'm like rolling my eyes. I'm like, oh, I imagine in the Kremlin, they cringe at the level of, flattery that they have to descend to handle this narcissistic egomaniac. It's at one hand, I guess maybe it's fun for them. On the other hand, you can't help but think it's a little, humiliating. But regardless, anyway, that was my reaction. I saw that painting delivered by Putin to Trump or for Trump, and I'm just, oh my God, like my eyes can't roll far enough up in my head. But one thing is quite clear: whether they can achieve a diplomatic settlement or not, which I think the money is on not, but we'll see whether or not Russia and the US manage to some degree improve bilateral relations, even if that diplomatic settlement of the Ukraine project fails. It's clear to me that the Kremlin is much better at playing and handling Trump on a psychological level than the attempts to do the same by Zelensky or European leaders or other countries like that. And China just isn't even playing. I mean,
right, exactly.
They obviously consider trying to play Trump as beneath them. They're just no tit tat, no attempt at flattery, no attempt at respect and paintings of Trump looking heroic. No, the Chinese don't do any of that. They're like, you meet us as equals at a table and we negotiate a trade deal. That's it, right? That's they don't play around. And I think there's something to be said for what the Kremlin is doing, right? Trying to ease the end game of this conflict into being in one form or another. But then there's also to be said for something that the Chinese are doing, which is just like, we have some dignity. We're China. We're the longest lived, largest, country, empire on earth going back millennia. And yeah, we're just not going to play this ball. We're not going to play this game.
Well, Mark, I'll say this. There seems to be, if you look, I've been talking about this lately. You look at all three negotiations, there's consistency with the way the Trump administration negotiates, attempting to play their hand as much stronger cards than they really have. There's an up and downness of it. There's a high and low, like, okay, we're really close. We're going to have something real quick. Then the next day, they better do what we say or else we're going to sanction them. Then the next day, I think we're really close to a deal. Then the next, it's like up and down. And with the Chinese, it's yes, sir, we'll put the Chinese in their place. And then Trump comes out and says, well, I think we're going to have a deal. I'm real good friends with Xi Jinping. I'll just give him a call. It's pretty, and there's this up and down. Then we're going to blow the Iranians to smithereens. That's right, smithereens. And the next day, I think we're having a good talk with the Iranians. We're getting somewhere. Then the next day, smithereens, I say. That's what we're going to blow them to. So there's this herky-jerky, inconsistent, incoherent.
It's just, it's incompetence, right? Let's call it what it is, right? The art of the deal, New York real estate, right, is not high diplomacy and geopolitics or trade. It's not. And whether it's negotiations with Russia, and obviously the Trump administration can't even handle U.S. vassals in Europe and Kiev. They're just flipping off Trump and paying absolutely no attention to him and wrecking if there wasn't really. Let's be frank. This Kellogg plan, right, that Trump is presenting. Russia said no to this already a year ago when it appeared in Western papers, right, back during the presidential campaign, right? They've said no to pretty much everything that is a component of this deal, other than, the absolutely absurd new point that, and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant that Russia has controlled since 2022, the U.S. gets it because Trump, right?
Why not the Kursk too? What the hell? The Kursk nuclear power plant? Why they go? I just might as well.
All the nuclear power plants, right? We can rebrand them as Trump Glow Energy or something. I don't know. But everywhere Trump is engaging in diplomacy, Russia, China, Iran, right? This high diplomacy is not. You're right. There's a consistent pattern of ridiculous bluff and bluster threatening to bomb, threatening to sanction, threatening to walk away, threatening to sanction hundreds of percent. And then he doesn't get what he wants. And then he throws a little tantrum. And at the same time, there's this consistent, absurd, and annoying attempt. Everything is great. All these deals are great. The talks are going great, right? You know, I mean, that's they can't ever admit that. Like with China's like, we're not even talking. Stop saying we're having negotiations. We're not. You're lying, right? We're not even talking. Why are you saying that? We saw this previously with the Russians, you know, that Trump was trying to claim that before anything even began. And as far as the Russians are concerned, negotiations for a diplomatic settlement in Ukraine, they haven't even started yet. Right? I mean, this is all Trump arguing with Kiev and the United States and on the pages, and this presidential envoy Witkoff, this real estate guy, you know, whoever he is, comes flying back and forth with a charming, supposedly charming used car salesman smile and a handshake. And this is what Trump is thinking. That's not negotiations, right? That's not a treaty. That's not, you know, the way things are done. Trump, you know, and repeatedly, you know, after the initial failure, there is the other consistency that Trump always wants to talk to them in person, right? Oh, I just need to meet them in person, and we can hash out a deal with a handshake and you know, be impressed with my magnificence, God Emperor presence or something like that, right? You know, that he just thinks that everything can be handled that way. And this is amusing at a certain level, right? It's entertaining. It's certainly that up and down, that jerkiness, that, you know, tariffs on, tariffs off, what tariffs, dictator, not a dictator, right? It certainly gives the 24/7 mainstream media news cycle, you know, continual fodder. And you know, if you're a Trump fanboy, you know, there's always a narrative spin. Oh, Trump planned it this way all along, right? You know, he was always going to, you know, inflict 70% tariffs on everyone and then pull them back, except on China, right? You know, after the bond market collapsed, he was always going to do that. Or on the other side, you know, the malcontents that are always going to hate Trump, not because Trump is incompetent, but simply because Trump is not a Democrat, right? Exactly. I mean, that's the petty partisan nature of American politics. But I find the entertainment value has gone out of it for me. Yeah. And now I'm just starting to get bored and annoyed, to be perfectly honest.
How about this, Mark? I remember when we were told look, things aren't going well, so they're just going to negotiate on returning diplomatic properties to Russia and getting a regular flights back going between Moscow. Okay.
Where's that?
Right. Okay. Yeah, exactly. I was about to say that's the easy stuff, isn't it? Yep. That's not,
you would think.
Have to stop. That's Trump being the chief saying, look, here's what you guys are going to do. Get those flights going back, number one. And the Russians got a group of properties, don't they? Yeah, they got a bunch of properties here, there, and there. Give them all back. Trump can do that.
That would seem to me to fall into executive powers.
Yeah.
Right?
How easy is that? But Obama used executive power to take them. So certainly, if Obama sees them, Trump could say, I'd give them back. That's the State Department. All that's under executive. Nobody could stop him from doing that, nor would they really have. What could they do? Take him to court? They couldn't really. But if you can't even get that done,
yeah, Russia. That's what Russia said. If we can't even restore basic diplomatic relations with functioning embassies and flights to each other's countries, at least for the diplomatic purpose, right? If you can't return the diplomatic property that Obama, not even Trump, that Obama stole illegally, as far as the Russians and really international law is concerned, right? If you can't even do that, then how can we progress any further, right? I mean, I mean, the same thing is going on with these Iran talks, right? One day Trump is going to bomb the entire country into the smithereens, such that these smithereens have so small have never been seen before, and now they're already back to negotiating the terms of exactly how much and to what degree of nuclear enrichment Iran can enrich nuclear fuel, which it must be said they are entitled to do as part of a civilian nuclear power program under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? So JCPOA 2.0, trademark Trump, better now than before, right? I mean, like that's what they're negotiating there. It seems to me. Now, obviously, the Israelis are furious that Trump hasn't already bombed Iran, and they thought they were going to get that out of it. But and certain members of Trump's administration, but Trump doesn't seem predisposed towards that. It's not saying it's not going to happen, but it seems that was another attempt at bluff and bluster to get the Iranians to the table. But I just keep getting the feeling when Trump is complaining that talks on Ukraine are taking too long, and talks in Iran are taking too long, and trade talks with China aren't having fast enough, which haven't, according to the Chinese, even begun yet, right? That the Trump administration has neither the skill set nor the most basic patience required to see these things through to fruition, right? Diplomacy, international diplomacy, is not a New York real estate deal. I mean, and Trump obviously doesn't. I mean, I understand that he doesn't trust the blob, right? He doesn't trust the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, the blob, the foreign policy elite, as Ben Rhodes calls it. He doesn't trust anyone in the State Department or the Foreign Services, right? Instead of his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the neocon, it's his old real estate buddy with no diplomatic experience or international relations, knowledge, running around the world everywhere. I mean, whether it's in Oman or Moscow or Israel, right? He's the one being sent. He's the only one that Trump trusts. But does Witkoff have the ability to negotiate terms of settlements and treaties by on behalf of the United States? No. Right? I mean, maybe he helps Trump get a sense of things. Maybe they get a sense of where Trump is, but that's only like that's the equivalent of a handshake, right? That is not there is a method, a form, and a procedure to go through diplomacy, right? And reaching settlements between states. And Trump obviously does not have the patience or the people with the skill sets that he trusts capable of doing that. And I wonder, are all of these, is all the diplomacy that the Trump administration does, not only with its adversaries, not only with China, Russia, and Iran, right, but with its own allies, supposed allies, Kiev and the Europeans, is it all doomed to fail, right? With bluff and bluster and walkbacks and this personal Witkoff envoy meetings, but where does it all go? What diplomatic victories has the Trump administration? I mean, can we even look at anywhere and said there is progress towards success on any of this? I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
A lot of people will jump right away and say, "What, you want Biden back?" No, it's not Coke or Pepsi, right? I don't have to, as an outside observer, as a former American, I don't have to say, oh, you only have a binary choice, and if you don't get one, then you get the other. No, I pox on both their houses, right? I hated the Biden administration's foreign policy, but say what you will, and I had a lot to say about it. We get a incoherent foreign policy, and there is, yes, a certain longing for some adults in the room. As Blinken didn't do diplomacy because he obviously regarded the Secretary of State as the head of the Department of War. We're also not getting any diplomacy simply because the Trump administration doesn't seem either disposed or competent enough to handle it. The U.S. just doesn't do diplomacy, whether it's the Democrats or the Trumpists.
Yeah, I'm with you. What we've got is a situation where we have people that they tie their own hands together so much. They can't do diplomacy. They're not focusing on a realistic outcome. One thing about diplomats, when they sit down at a table, they got to be realistic. They can do all kind of bluff and bluster out in the streets and in front of the cameras and all, but when they sit down and close the doors, they got to be like, this is what it is. This is here are our options, and they have to be realistic. And what we're seeing is, even under the Trump administration, they still seem to be living in the world of a narrative instead of the real world. When you put forward a policy or a proposal, and everybody in the room, everyone like us, I keep saying, I'm just some schlump on YouTube. I got no history in geopolitics other than what I've read, other than my, this is my history book, which probably seems to be more than some of these jerks. But my point being, as soon as they lay it down, I look at it and I'm like, well, hell, the Russians will never take that. You know what I mean? What are you doing? I guess if you ran it by me first, what do you think, Garland? I read that document. Look, take that document from December of 2021 and lay it down and look at it. And that is where you have to work from. The Russians said that. You start with looking at it and thinking, is there anything there the Russians may be flexible on? Are there things that they're not? You got to work from that document. I don't even know if they know that document exists, Mark.
No,
unless
because
the Russians
they're
are just every
still
time
not listening to the Russians. They're not. If Trump put forward Kellogg's plan, right? This is essentially what it is, right? That the plan that Kellogg floated back when Trump was campaigning in the media. That's essentially what this is, right? When it's obvious that the Russians won't accept it, the Kiev regime won't accept it, America's own European allies won't accept it. Then what are they doing, right? We're told that the Trump administration, right, and there have been signs that they have a more realistic assessment of where things really are on the battlefield and the state of things, and that they're accepting of reality. And when I see them present this pile of old feces forward, right, and I then have to question, but do they really, right? Unless this is some 5D chess play where Trump is still looking to create room to walk away. He said early this week, if I don't get results in the next few days, right, we're just going to walk away, right? We're going to move on. The U.S. has other priorities. Here we are at the end of the week. Everything it didn't even get to the meeting, right? Rubio and Witkoff turned around, right, and didn't head to Europe when Zelensky and the Europeans, right, said, no, not only no, but not at all no. And here's our plan for Ukrainian victory, and that's the only thing we're considering. Where is Trump walking away? Now he's talking 2 more weeks, right? 2 more weeks. I don't see any process. And it seems his bluff and bluster about bombing Iran and sanctioning Russia is no more real than his threats to walk away, right? Now, okay, all right. So everything has collapsed. You can blame the Kiev regime. You can blame the Europeans. And is he walking away? No, he could, right? Now is the time. If he was going to do it, the space has opened for him, if that was really his intention. And they still don't know what to do because the Trump administration is divided and Trump doesn't have a plan. He's listening to Rubio and Waltz and Kellogg say one thing. He's listening to Witkoff and others say something else, and they're still stumbling around. They don't have a plan. They don't know what to do. They're still, let's face it, I think, like you said, they're still largely playing in a narrative world, and they're not even as good at managing their make-believe narrative world as the Biden administration did. At least their narrative make-believe world was more consistent in its make-believe qualities.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what's happening is the people around him are now taking him for a clown. You know what I mean? They're now looking at him and they're losing confidence in any level of competence. They're looking at this guy, Hegseth, and they're saying, "You pick this guy. This guy's, he comes across like a grunt. You know what I mean? He comes across like one of the guys who he's a slick sleeve. He's not even a PFC yet. He just got out of boot camp, and he and the guys go in town every week, and then they get drunk, and then the platoon leader has to go get them out of jail and bring them back to the base and sober them up and make them march for a couple of days. You know what I mean? That's like who this guy is. He's not leading the platoon. He ain't the platoon leader, much less the secretary of.
He's not some type of deep, insurgent against the deep state, breaking apart artificial structures, right? Yes, the Pentagon is against him, right? We read that in Politico that the entire Pentagon is against him. But what is he doing? The only thing he's doing at this point is wasting time with political battles of his wife and his mistress and whoever the hell was included in whatever signals or Snapchat or whatever he was, leaking government plans on, right? Again, it just comes down to basic competencies, right? I mean, that's really a sorry choice. That are we stuck with evil competencies, but competent, or
not quite as evil
flavor of evil and not competent? I mean, it's not that I prefer what was before. It's just that they're both awful, and I'm not.
Well, here's the thing. I think you can look at this, and as we say, we've discussed the fact that two nuclear powers weren't talking was very dangerous.
Yeah, it was.
You got to say that at least the Trump administration, there's some semblance of reality. There was none in the Biden administration.
The Biden administration was firing ballistic missiles into Russia.
Yes.
That has stopped. That alone. Yeah. Okay. So I've got all these complaints. Let's at least be thankful for that. I am thankful for that because we were that close to World War III.
Yeah. So, and they're making an effort with Russia, and they're doing a lot of bluffing. I'd rather have a bluff than actually punches thrown. Yeah. But they seem to be right now, 3 months in. To be frank, they seem to be all just tangled up. You know what I mean? They're just all like somebody who's tangled up in a net, and they don't know which way to go, and they don't know which way to pull to get out of it. In every way, shape, or form, it's not like they can clean up one of their messes and then go on to the others. And if you look at it, Ukraine apparently is the one he wanted to clean up. He wanted let's get this done, and then we can move on to some other things. Domestic, economic, every single one of them so far has gone bad. But let me ask you this.
Let's not forget the Hamas deal with Palestine, and that has completely collapsed and gone nowhere either, right? We're right back where we were when Trump came into power.
And they're still losing, and they're losing a naval battle to the Houthis. I might add, the Houthis are averaging about a drone or two a week now. So at this rate, count the number of drones that you have, that of MQ-9 Reaper drones, count the number that you have and the number of weeks before they're all gone, because they're going down about once a week.
more than just the Reaper drone, which is impressive, right? $30 million a pop, and the Houthis with credibility claim to have shot down like 21 or 22 of them now. But even more important than that, while they're playing whack-a-mole, they are wasting air defense missiles, of which the U.S. is critically short of for the Kiev regime, critically short of to defend Israel in case of a conflict with Iran,
Everybody.
critically short of to defend its own military bases in case of a conflict with Iran. And we know that the production is terminally low. They haven't managed. They were at something like 500 Patriot missiles a year, and they were talking about ramping it up to 600. And procedure is to fire 2 Patriot missiles at anything to get a chance of bringing it down. Air defense is the U.S.'s Achilles heel. And right, I have a certain amount of sympathy. I have a lot of sympathy for Aran Salah, for the Houthis. But again, from a cold-blooded geopolitical perspective, if I'm sitting in Tehran or Moscow or Beijing and I see the U.S. wasting what is already its shortage Achilles heel, playing whack-a-mole against the Houthis in the deserts of Yemen, I'm just like, playa, keep going, keep going, right? Because it reduces the U.S.'s ability to wage war against Iran, against elsewhere, right? Because, I mean, they're air defense missiles, long-range strike missiles, right? These expensive Reaper drones, as you're pointing out. And one of these days, the Houthis are going to get lucky, and they're going to hit a U.S. warship, right? Probably because the U.S. will be short on air defense.
Exactly.
So
they'll be better. Really, the Houthis are better off if they don't. Just wear them down. The Houthis don't have to hit them. Really, with the Houthis, here's the thing about it. As long as they're fighting and they're throwing drones and missiles at them, the whole world says you're winning. Because you're so small in compared to them and weak, the fact that they have to even acknowledge your existence and fire back is a massive victory for the Houthis. But add this. Well, if that ain't bad enough, they pissed off the Chinese. And now the Chinese are like, you get no rare earth minerals, you get no magnets, all the things that they need to make these missiles. They get none of that anymore. Yep. So if they had planned on ramping up their production of missiles, well, that's about to come to a screeching halt. They will have no production of missiles. And the Chinese don't seem to be in a hurry to help them build missiles to fire back at them.
Yeah. Politico was talking about this already some 3 weeks ago when the whole tariff thing started, that the Pentagon is actually petrified because too many of their high-tech components for their high-tech weapons are whether we're talking components or resources like rare earths, are outsourced out. They don't have a U.S. chain of production with, control of everything. Now, that could be one of the goals, right? For the Pentagon to, bring home all production so they're making all their own weapons. That would be the smart thing. But you don't launch a war of tariffs without having your own, a state in order first, right? Particularly if you're out there threatening war against this country and that country. And forget the war of attrition that Russia is winning against the Kiev regime and all of NATO in Ukraine. The Houthis are winning a war of attrition against the United States in the Red Sea and in Yemen. That's what's going on, because there is no sign right now that the Houthis are slowing down or are inhibited from fighting back, from occasionally taking pot shots, right? Which is the supposed goal of all of this. So it was dumb when the Biden administration did it. It's dumb for the Trump administration. But when your enemy is doing something stupid, don't stop them, right? Right. Okay. Again, we're not firing ballistic missiles into Russia. We're not on the verge of World War III. The US and Russia are talking again, right? Even if the Russians are rolling their eyes and saying that every meeting is a cluster F, right? Because the Trump administration doesn't know what it's doing. All right, that aside, another net positive out of the Trump administration is they not only diplomatically, but economically and militarily, they may leave the US in a very bad position, right? They're screwing everything up, right? They're screwing up, their economic war. They're screwing up the military situation, continuing to waste resources in Yemen. If the goal was to defeat Russia, then or at least make Russia hurt, they're not providing weapons to the Kiev regime. Again, I consider that a positive. But they don't ever have a chance in hell of catching up with Chinese shipbuilding, right? to fight a Pacific war. What's Chinese shipbuilding capacity? Like 275 times the United States right now. And they're weakening the US. And through bad decisions and incompetence, if that's where 4 years of Trump leaves the US, it's not good for Americans, maybe. It's good for the rest of us out there.
Well, here's the book. I don't know if I've ever seen it. People's War, People's Army, the Viet Cong Insurrection Manual by General Giap, right? And if you read that book, excellent book, I might add. It's how they defeated the French, actually, but same thing. It is how the smaller power defeats the imperial power. Well, it helped that he got a lot of help from the Soviet Union and China. But that being said, on a worldwide basis, you see that right now. You know what I mean? Wherein rather than one big front against, you don't want, if you're fighting this big behemoth, you don't want to have a big front where you line up all your troops and tanks against his troops and tanks, because you're going to lose that. You want to punch him over here in Iran. You want to punch him over here in China. You want to punch him over here in Ukraine. You know what I mean? You want to drain his resources. You want to make the front wherever you can make it, etc. So not that it's coordinated, which I'm not saying that it is, but on an organic way, in an organic manner, the U.S. empire has created that dynamic for itself by picking fights with everybody. They now have little various and different kinds of skirmishes ongoing everywhere. They're locked in every one of them. And because they're hubris, the only way out is for them to say, you do what I tell you, and whoever they're dealing with say yes. And that's not happening. So they've embroiled themselves in skirmishes all over the world that they can't get out of. And everyone is taxing their resources. And anyway, go on, Mark.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And what I see is that the Russian, Chinese, Iranian tripartite is holding strong. Look at the Biden administration attempted to surge militarily and economically with the economic war against Russia. And what did it gain? A depleted NATO military stocks, Russia, maybe not quickly, but successfully winning a war of attrition against the Kiev regime and all of NATO in Ukraine. And the Russian economy just, shedding off those sanctions, right? And that economic war like water off of a duck's back, and emerging and growing at a faster rate, right, than either the US or the European economies. So then there's an attempt to economically surge against China. And what happens there? The Chinese stand strong, and they can make all of these counter moves, like China stopped saying, all right, no more LNG or energy from the United States. We'll just get everything from Russia. Why? Because the tripartite has each other's back, right? The U.S. attempted to sanction Russia, and China refused, right? They didn't actively help them, but they continued trade. They increased trade, and the Iranians provided some strategic military technical assistance, trade back and forth. right? You attempt to surge against Iran, right? You threaten these talks. You threaten, to bomb Iran, and the Chinese are like, well, we'll continue to buy Iranian energy, and the Russians are like, well, look, you want a nuclear deal with Iran? We're going to have to be at the table, right? So you see, diplomatically, economically, militarily, they keep having each other's back. And they're preventing the US, whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, from surging towards one of them and finishing them off, because it leaves them too weak against the other two. And at some point, they pull back. We're seeing this again and again and again. And what I see is that this Russian, Chinese, Iranian strategic partnerships, this tripartite, is like a firewall that is successfully, the U.S. can't surge against any one of the three and achieve success without weakening itself too much against the other two now. Not even Iran, which is, obviously the smallest and least powerful of the three of them. And I think is a new geopolitical reality that the US has already dropped so far from superpower status that they're not able to, or you could relatively say Russia, China, and Iran have risen so much, and this cooperation between the three of them. And again, thank you, the US, for creating that alliance, right? That's back to that famous Joe Biden video again, right? Lots of luck in your senior year. China, what are you going to do? Turn to Iran next, right? That hubris, that moment, that is the quintessential video, not just of the Biden presidency, but of American foreign policy since the 1990s. And it is the fatal hubris of the United States that has created such three different countries, cultures, political systems: Russia, China, and Iran. And not only are they cooperating to such a degree now that it's impossible to close on any one of them, but that partnership is also the foundation of an alternative multipolar world order.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. And the thing about it is, meanwhile, it gives them opportunity to make other moves because the Russians are hardening North Korea. Because normally North Korea would be right in the gun sights of the U.S. empire, but they're because I think when Trump says we got other things that we want to do and we want to get out of here so we can, one of the things is, he wants to talk to North Korea, I'm going to get a deal with North Korea, which of course by Trump means to say to North Korea, you better give me a deal or I'm going to bomb the hell out of you. I'll destroy a nuke and wipe you out. That's how he starts every negotiations, but he doesn't even get a chance to do that. And meanwhile, the Russians get a chance to harden North Korea as a target. Yep. And you know what I mean? And strategically to make moves with North Korea that makes both of them stronger. China's in on that. So it gives them opportunity to harden some of their other allies and to expand this, shall we call it, a worldwide axis of resistance.
Look at, for the last two administrations, Biden now into Trump, right? North Korea is stable, right? There's no more U.S. threats to go after North Korea. Right? Through a combination of them developing nuclear weapons and through firmed up partnerships with Russia and China. North Korea looks stable. No, there's not any threats in the last two administrations against North Korea. And I tell you what, if I was Iran, and not only if I was Iran, but if I was Russia and China interested in stability in the Middle East, the lesson I would take from this is if Iran gets nuclear weapons, then, right, that's it, right? There's no more, going after, pulling a Gaddafi, right? You're going after Libya or, taking out Assad or something like this. I'm sorry. North Korea gaining nuclear weapons was an act of geopolitical stability
Yes, it
in the
was.
North Pacific. And I think that if Iran did actually begin a weapons program and gain nuclear weapons, it would be a tense, it would risk a moment of confrontation. But if they just get over that hurdle, then obviously the lessons learned from North Korea is then stability and safety is guaranteed.
I think you're
I
right.
don't
I
know
think
how else to read it.
well, you don't hear the Trump calling North Korea threatening to bomb them every other day
Nope. Nope.
because they
Nor
know.
did you even hear Biden threaten to do that, right? North Korea just fell off their radar. Damn, they got nuclear weapons. Well, what can we do? Not much.
Yeah,
Continue sanctions, right? Well, there's nothing left we can sanction in North Korea. Well, then just cast them dirty glances from across the Pacific.
let me ask you
Or
something.
conduct military drills in South Korea. That's all they got.
Let me ask you something, and I'm going to put two things together. Okay, we got a terrorist attack in Kashmir. The Iran, the Indians are threatening the Pakistani. There's very, very dangerous situation, and just at this time, the Pakistani defense minister comes out and says, "We've been doing the dirty work for the U.S." Helping them, do things. If we hadn't joined the war against the Soviet Union, the war against 9/11, our track record would be unimpeachable. He basically says,
and they, if you'll remember that the previous Pakistani prime minister was looking at cementing energy deals with Russia at the beginning of the SMO as well, and that whole Pakistan getting close to Russia that was all silenced and went away as well. So once again, Pakistan sided with the United States and did their dirty work.
could I be, I don't know, possibly, I don't know. I interpret that in a way, particularly in light of this very dangerous terrorist attack, almost that he's implying that there was maybe the evil hand of imperialism involved in that attack, that maybe there were possibly well, we know that, what was it, I think the prime minister of Pakistan just came from lived in the suburbs of London before Khan got overthrown, and he got so it seems to me that, could I look at this and say MI6 and their evil works could be afoot, and he maybe there's some implication that Westerners are involved, or maybe that he suspects Westerners were involved?
I really, it's nothing is beyond the U.S. and the British, right? No vile act of terrorism or incitement of provocation. We've seen it again and again and again. Whether this is involved or not. But the one thing I definitely read out of all of this is the Pakistanis are lamenting how long they've been the chump and proxy of the United States and Britain, and it has never led them to any good situation. And I'm like, duh. I mean, take a look at the Kurds again and again and again. Take a look at the Ukrainians. Take a look at whoever you want. And when has being a U.S. proxy, how often has it ended up well in even the medium term, much less the long term? Not very often, right? And if the Pakistani is stupid enough to have acted in what it saw as a placating way, or as some type of proxy for the U.S. in the geopolitics of that part of the world, and now they're lamenting that the West doesn't have their back. I mean, like, what do you expect?
Yeah, exactly.
No sympathy.
I do think that one of the interesting things right now of all of that I'm watching, look, I just think the Russians are going to continue to play push me, pull you with the Americans as long as they can get away with it. Yeah, send Witkoff, he's back. Send them, we'll talk to him, he's back. If I'm the Russians, that's what I do. Yeah, let's keep doing this. This works for me. We'll do what we do. I think the Iranians are also willing to negotiate, as long as, they need to negotiate and drag it out. What's interesting is the Chinese. I'll finish with this, because the U.S. threw a punch at the Chinese that they couldn't afford to throw. right? And they didn't think the Chinese were going to take the kind of actions I mean, like 100 Boeing jets. That we don't want them. We're not buying billions of dollars worth of soybeans, beef, all of this stuff. We're cutting off, and it's really hurting some people, right?
LNG. Yep.
And now they're like, okay, we're going to talk with the Chinese, and the Chinese are like, you will drop everything, or we don't talk. And there ain't no way. That's the one I'm watching. Will the Chinese soften that up and say, okay, we'll talk if you drop it down to 25% or something? If the Chinese hold, that means it's like Trump, you have to completely walk back this one and take you have to take a punch and say, I lost, or everything goes down. And you can't afford to let it all go down. But with the Chinese have them over a barrel, and I don't know, are they going to play hardball? Because they can.
Yeah. Are they doing what Trump did? Are they pulling a reverse Trump and making threats at this point, right? Maybe they are. Maybe they're playing that game. But I think you're right. The Trump administration screwed up. They didn't think, whether you believe tariffs as an economic policy is the way forward for the U.S. to escape the economic trap that decades of its own neoliberal globalization, architecture that it created have come back to haunt it. Obviously the tariff plan that the Trump administration had was not well thought through or implemented, right? And we see this by them having to walk everything back. And only now are they realizing how much damage they've done to the Pentagon, how much damage they've done to this. Oh, the bond market, right? Oh, Trump simply telling the stock market not to sell off doesn't work. I mean, it's the Chinese are certainly taking advantage of the situation. But they're also looking very strong to the rest of the world, right? Not only are they standing alone against the United States, you don't see India standing with them, right? They actually publicly asked India, hey, stand against this tariff war with us. And India's like, nah, we'll cut a deal with lobbyists behind the scenes in a few months. But you go ahead, you do that, right? Once again, I think not only specifically with the issue of China looks bigger, China looks more adult, and the rest of the world is watching this, and they're seeing Chinese strength and U.S., well, if you want to call it incompetence or weakness or insanity, whatever you want to call it, but it's obviously not working out for them.
Yeah, you're right. They, with all of these so-called negotiations, we're going to negotiate with the Russians. And it's like with Ukraine, they bit off more than they could chew that time. And now, I'll add one last thing before we go. As far as the Russians, granted, there's loss of life, and you don't want a dangerous war to continue. But even then, as loony as the Europeans are, you're still continually demilitarizing them. And that's a good thing. You got that trash compactor built up. And every now and then you hear from them, we're sending some more tanks. Yeah, great. We're sending some more tractor. Good. Keep sending them in so we can blow them up. So you're demilitarizing, you're defanging these people to make them even less powerful. You're defanging the US because they're still sending stuff up. In a way, you don't want them to send stuff in, but the more stuff they send in, the weaker they get. So the US and the Europeans are just pouring their stuff into Ukraine, and the Russians are destroying it and weakening them militarily. You would prefer not for that to happen, but that is a reality.
The irony that they thought that's what they were going to do to Russia throughout all of this, of course, is the icing on the cake.
And you know what that does? Here's what that does. They're shorter of everything, which means they need to make everything. They need more stuff to be built. At exactly the time when they get really weak and they need to do that, China yanks the rug out and says, we're not going to sell you the magnets. We're not going to sell you we're not going to. So it's like you were saying about this kind of a triumvirate of evil, I guess they'd say. I guess Russians are now, part of the axis of the renewed axis of evil. But where one guy's destroying your equipment and the other guy, and you say, I need to build more. And this guy says, oh, you need to build more? Yeah. Just in time for me to say, no, you can't have the materials, you build them. So now I'm running out of stuff, and your cohort, your ally says, I ain't going to give you the stuff to build it. And now I'm weak and I can't even rebuild. And I feel like this, if I'm China, look, I want to sell stuff to the US. So at some point I push and they push. And at some point I say to if I'm China, I say, all right, let's do a deal and come up with some numbers, right? Okay, so we come up with some numbers, we start selling stuff. If the US is willing to do that, I do that. But here's what I don't do. I don't, in the way that, you know, once the US puts sanctions on, they never take them off. If I'm China, I'm going to say, great, we got a deal for selling stuff. And then they say, okay, well, now are you going to go back to buying our beef and soybeans? Oh, no, I've got other suppliers. Oh, now are you going to go back to selling us all of the things we need to build missiles so we can attack you? Nah, I tell you what I'll do. You get all of your stuff the hell off of our borders and all of the missiles, and you do all of that stuff. We'll do that. Other than that, the answer is
arms into Taiwan.
Exactly. Yeah. Other than that, no. See what I mean? I give them they go up the escalated the ladder of sanctions. They never go back. If I'm China, even if I get a trade deal, those things that I have done to weaken you militarily and economically, I ain't buying that stuff from Boeing. I'm not buying food and stuff from you. I found somebody else. And I'm not going to give you the stuff you need to blow me to hell. Nope. But we can, trade in common grills and Walmart gifts. Not a problem.
And that's exactly what Russia is talking right now, with Western companies getting a scent of where things are going towards the end game. And they're sniffing around after having run away from the Russian market, of coming back to the Russian market. And they're like, yeah, can we come back in? And everyone's like, no, who needs your shit? Right? I mean, that's the way it is right now. They've permanently lost market share in a whole lot right now, and they're not going to be able to gain it back through the strength of Russian businesses, through other foreign markets that have come forward for import substitution, and simply from a Russian governmental sense that we don't know if we ever really want Western companies to play a big part in our country's economy again. And if so, then it's going to be on much smaller level and on our terms, right? That's where it is. We don't need your investment anymore. Right?
No. And we don't trust you.
Yeah.
Why should we let you back in so you can screw us over again? Why should we sell you stuff so you can use it to build missiles and point at us and send it to Taiwan and all that kind of stuff? We will sell trinkets and things like that, computers and things that are an advantage to us and that you need. Fine. But the things that you require to build a military, we ain't selling it to you. And we're not buying the stuff we used to buy. It's too late. Even from a practical perspective, if I'm China, I got 1.5 billion people to feed. I need a steady supply of beef. I need a steady supply of, soybeans or whatever, right? I need a dependable supplier. Russia sells some of that stuff. Brazil sells some of that. That's BRICS. I'm buying it from the BRICS people. We have agreements in BRICS that we're not going to sanction people, and you don't. I'm sorry. I got to go by the people that every couple years I don't have to worry about them saying, I hate you, I'm not selling you anything, or it's going to be a 200% tariff. It's just practicality.
Russian farmers are starting to seriously look into and start up production of soybeans to replace the U.S. having been lost out of the Chinese market. That's exactly what Russia's doing.
If I'm China, I'm like, guys, if you grow them, I'll buy them. It's not, that's a market insistence, right? Hey, it doesn't get any better than that. Somebody says, if you come up with the product, I can buy it. You got to go in that direction. Mark Sleboda, once again, where can everybody find your good works?
Yeah, you can follow my evil screeds on Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sleboda1, or on Telegram or Substack, or both, preferably, at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
You can tell Mark Sleboda understands international politics because he was a Johnny Quest fan. If you're a Johnny Quest fan, you understand. They were always flying around the world in the Johnny Quest weird looking jet doing all kinds of stuff. Man, that was a great show.
What?
My favorite. All right. Thanks a lot. Everybody, don't forget, follow Mark. That's important. Share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rockfin and Rumble. Sometimes my stuff gets thrown off of YouTube, and you can still find all of my videos there on Rockfin and Rumble. Follow Mark on X if you can afford it. Patreon, buy me a coffee, whatever. Even if you can't, it doesn't matter. The important thing is the people in the chat, all 1,108 of them, you guys are and girls are the most important people in alternative media. Mark and I just run our mouths, but what you guys do is you share this stuff on all your social media platforms and people get to see it. That's how people see it. You know, the algorithms are against us. We don't have Pfizer, Schmeiser, and Boeing and all advertising and all that kind of stuff. We just have you guys out here. So please do your due diligent duty. Share this everywhere. X, Telegram, Facebook, you name it. Maybe a couple of people will see it and maybe somebody will learn something. Thanks a lot. We're out.